This is Caroline from Caroline's Adventure. We all face challenges in our lives. How do some people take those challenges and turn them into powerful results? Join me as we dig into a story on resilience, hope, and joy, and uncover lessons we can each use in our own lives. But before we start, please take a moment to show that 5-star rating button some love, and follow while you're there to be updated every time I release a new episode. Now, before we begin, a word of caution. On this podcast, we regularly discuss topics like sexual assault, suicide, and addiction, which may be disturbing to some. Please take care as you listen. And if you need support in the United States, reach out to the crisis text line at 741-741. Today we are joined by Jessica Ella, and Jessica's got one of those amazingly in-depth stories that as soon as I saw her page, it just resonated with me. She's very open about the fact that she came from a background of abuse, but what makes her story so compelling is what she did with the pain and how she's worked to pay it forward and help others with it. Jessica, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So start us off at the beginning. What led you down this path?
Yeah, I guess I always say I was running my entire childhood and teens, early 20s from an invisible threat. I became obsessed with healing when I was in my teen years, and I never knew why. I was so focused on trauma. I wanted to understand what trauma was, how it worked. When I started working with trauma clients, I wanted to work with the worst of the worst. And I was always on this mission to understand how trauma works, how we heal it at the deepest level possible. And what I didn't realize is that I was actually trying to heal myself. I was actually trying to understand myself, and I was actually trying to understand why I suffered so deeply, because at this point in my life, I didn't have any understanding of why I was suffering. I had some understanding. I'd had a lot of different traumas throughout my childhood, things like bullying, issues with my stepdad, verbal abuse. I'd had a best friend pass away. I'd had lots of, I would probably big trauma, but smaller traumas. But working through them, and I didn't really understand why I was still suffering. I just felt everything so deeply. I felt pain so deeply. And it wasn't until 10 years into studying, even working with other people, that I uncovered memories of abuse from my childhood and what was actually causing all of this suffering. What I came to understand was that my dad had been sexually abusive from earliest memory, the 3, all the way throughout my childhood. Hundreds of memories returned. My grandfather, his father, also took my virginity, raped me when I was 7 years old. My father then raped me when I was a little bit older. And this all just came to the surface and made so much sense why I had been suffering and struggling. And the crazy thing about it is that I had flashbacks throughout my entire life, 20s, 30s, I'd just be standing there doing some small task and I'd have these flashes, visuals of my father doing these things. But I had gotten so good at dissociating, compartmentalizing information, blaming myself, controlling my brain essentially, that I see these flashes and I had coping mechanisms where I would push them back down for a couple of days and then go about my life again. And I didn't even know I was doing that in retrospect. I was so good at it that I wasn't even consciously aware that I was doing it. I was just speaking to my partner last night. He always says to me, I can't understand how you didn't end up more screwed up. How did you not get admitted to psych wards? How did you not turn to drugs? How did you not become homeless? And I think that my coping mechanism was just keep going. Just one more day, one more step, one more. And that's the way that I've always approached even my healing journey. One more memory. Okay, there's more. All right, we'll deal with these and then it will be fine. And then it's not fine and there's more. But then I just deal with those and then we just go forward and forward. And I feel like that became part of who I was. It was just just keep moving forward.
It is interesting though, isn't it? In doing these interviews, I've talked with people who've gone through so many different kinds of trauma. I'm always fascinated at what enables some people to come through it stronger and other people completely get just taken under by it. What is your take on that? What do you think enabled you to come through this and turn around and give back to others?
I think it depends on other factors in their life. I'm lucky that I had a really loving mother, even though she was a little bit absent, a little bit dissociated herself and didn't know what was going on. She did love me and I knew she loved me. So there was this unconditional love there. I think a lot of people that go down a different path potentially have two parents that are abusive or two parents that they don't feel they've got that love from. And I think that can really change the trajectory because there's nothing to hold on to. There's just nothing. And this feeling of complete aloneness. And although I did have that because I was holding so many secrets, I couldn't share them, which felt really lonely. I did know that my mum loved me unconditionally, like completely unconditionally. I was an unhinged teenager, as you can imagine. I was raging. I had so much just trauma that I didn't know what to do with and I couldn't tell. But she just kept loving me. And I didn't realize until later on in life that actually had a big impact. So a lot of the time, people that I see go down a different path have two parents that can be quite toxic or two parents that they didn't feel that. But also, I think it's personality because I feel like I was born like this. Like my mum said, I've always just been the strongest personality. I was just born this way. They say two children raised in the same home by an alcoholic father, say one boy grows up and becomes financially successful. He never touches alcohol in his life. And when he's interviewed, he says, well, my father was an alcoholic. I watched him waste his life away and I never wanted to be like that. And then the other brother becomes exactly like the father, becomes an alcoholic and says, well, it's all I know, it's all I saw. Two same upbringings, completely different perspectives. I do believe that there is like this inherent personality as to like how we deal with things.
It's interesting. As we were talking before, I grew up in abuse, physical, verbal, emotional. There was a lot of abuse going on in my household. And I've researched this extensively because I'm fascinated. And so hearing your story about how you were fascinated by trauma, I've been the same way. Part of it has been trying to understand what made my father the way he was, but part of it's also just trying to understand what it is that I'm going through. And one of the interesting things I've learned about children that grow up in trauma is that no two children grow up in the same family, meaning that each one experiences a very different upbringing. And often when you've got two kids that are in that environment, I was just reading an article about this, that exactly as you said, you have one that becomes a significant overachiever, and you have one that becomes a significant underachiever. And you also have the dynamic of one typically becomes highly empathic and highly attuned to the needs of others. The other one starts to display narcissistic characteristics of taking from others. They track this over and over and over again. And it fascinates me because I'm like, what is it about us that makes us continue those paths? My sister and I very much grew up in different households. My sister has no memory of the abuse at all. And to be fair, I ran interference a lot to pull the abuse away from her because I thought I was helping to protect. But it's fascinating to me that she has no memory of it whatsoever. And to the point that, like, she and my mother both deny that it happened. For a long time, I questioned my reality until my father passed away and I got some of his journals. And in his words, he talked about it. And I was like, okay, it's not my imagination.
It happens so often. There's so many other people that deny their reality because they can't cope with what's actually happened. And their coping mechanism is to completely push it down, to deny, to forget because they don't want to have to deal with it. So your mother, her incentive is that she wouldn't want to have to look at herself, the fact that she didn't protect you, she wasn't a good mother. And then your sister probably just wouldn't want to actually look at it at all because it's painful, it's hard. Yours is to see the truth, uncover the truth, to understand it all. My brother and sister, when I came forward and told them about the abuse, my sister actually, I told her, look, I was sexually abused throughout childhood. And she said it was dad, wasn't it? So she didn't know, but it was an easy guess for her. And she and my brother both believed me straight away, supported me, trusted me. So I had that support as well, which is, again, another protective factor. It's another thing that made me feel safe in coming forward, speaking up. And over time, my brother has come out and said, it happened to me too. And my sister has all of the signs there, but she's a vault. She is trying to uncover it, but her brain is just like, absolutely not. She has a lot of the signs and symptoms that there is something there, like nightmares and intrusive thoughts. I can totally relate with you. I'm the eldest, so I tried to protect my brother and sister, and I could only do that to a degree. There was definitely times where I failed at that, we will say. It wasn't really my job, but where I became aware that they had been being abused. And it was like, it's actually one of the hardest things because we can sort of deal with it when it's us, but when it's someone that we love or someone trying to protect, it's so much worse. It's awful when people deny your reality. It's one of the most asked questions in my DMs. People are like, I think that this happened, but my family's telling me it didn't. How do I know if it's real? And it's so awful because until you accept that it's real, you can't heal it. You can't heal what you don't think is real. You can't heal what you're not willing to feel, what you're not willing to look at. You have to be able to understand it, accept it, bring it forward, look at it. And if everyone's denying it, you're having to constantly push it down. That person is just going to continually struggle for years with this invisible pain. It's like, why do I feel like this? And this is one of those number one things when people come to me and say, I've been struggling my whole life, like deep darkness, deep sadness, deep intense panic, but I don't have any memories from childhood. I'm like, yeah, I've actually had a few arguments lately on social media, people coming at me saying, that's not true. Some people can just suffer for no reason. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they've got no childhood memories. And I'm just like,
Like, what are you hiding? You're hiding from something. Whether you want to own it or not, you're hiding from something. That's self-preservation from something.
absolutely. Our brains are designed for survival. Our brains are not just going to throw all of this pain and suicidal thoughts and darkness and fear for no reason. It's ringing the alarm bells because there's an invisible threat. And it's such a hard thing because until somebody validates your reality or you have the strength, which is often very rare, to validate your own reality and to go, no, I know that this is true. I believe this. I'm going to heal it.
Yeah.
Most people who've been through trauma don't have enough self-trust or self-worth to do that, which is kind of like catch-22. They just go around in circles because they're like, oh no, there's something wrong with me instead of something happened to me. And it's probably the biggest shift that I try to get people to understand is it's not something wrong with your brain. You are just born with a bad brain. Something's happened to you that's made you feel this way. And people don't like it.
Well, because when you've been raised, told what's done to you is because you're a bad kid. And I remembered that clearly. But then, like, when my mother and my sister denied it, I was like, okay, maybe I was so bad that I'm justifying it to myself when the people that are supposed to protect you tell you, no, your version of reality is not real. There must be something flawed in you inherently. And when you've been abused because you are quote unquote bad or because you're bringing it upon yourself, that's the narrative that you have around who you are as a person. Why would I create this narrative? Finding my father's journals was so incredibly validating to me. As awful as it was to read it, it was so validating to be like, nope, motherfucker, it's right there in black and white. It's on the page, the man's words. Like, this is not me making it up. He owns the fact that he did it. And he's saying that he did it because I was bad. But point remains, he's admitting that he did it.
That would have been so validating. And what you're speaking about there was once you've been gaslit, especially in your formative years, you develop a pattern of self-gaslighting, which essentially is where you see a truth and you know a truth. And then you gaslight yourself into unseeing that truth because there's nothing that you have control over. This is what's happening with people who have narcissistic tendencies and things like that, as we mentioned before. They see a truth and then they self-gaslight. Sometimes we self-gaslight to put ourselves down, but sometimes we self-gaslight to pump ourselves up. It's like they're doing the same thing, but they're just going in a different path. But they see this truth and they go, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to project that onto somebody else because I've seen it and I want to unsee it. So I'm going to project it over here. So I've got a new narrative, or I'm going to self-blame and I'm going to gaslight myself into thinking that, that I'm the problem and that there's something wrong with me and that I need to do more work on myself or whatever it is. So we're either going to self-gaslight or gaslight somebody else. It sounds like for you, the empathetic you've had this trauma, you've been told that it's because of you, you learn to blame yourself, which reduces your self-worth. And in relationships, you see a red flag and then you go, oh no, I'm probably being too dramatic. I probably did something to frustrate him. I'm a pretty hard person to be around. And all those old narratives from childhood come up. You don't even need to necessarily be with somebody who's gaslighting you. We generally do. But pick them unconsciously. But you don't even need to be with them because you're so conditioned to self-gaslight that eventually you don't even bother bringing up conversations because you just assume that everything is your fault. And that's the biggest healing that has to happen in those situations, is to be like, sometimes it's a trigger of mind. The healing is that I'm not saying get the fuck out of my life. That's the healing. But that's really hard for people to find that balance, because until you've done a lot of healing work, you don't have that worth and that conviction to go. I remember the day that I turned around to my now ex-husband, but he was my husband at the time, and was like, no, I've done so much healing work on myself. I'm not triggered right now. You're an asshole. You need to look at your stuff. It's your turn. And I was able to actually put other people, not just him, but other people's behaviors back onto them.
Like, it's funny because I remember myself, I used to be anxious attachment. As soon as they would start to pull away, I'd be like, oh my God, what am I not doing? What do I need to fix? I'm letting them down. I'm doing something that's causing this. What am I going to do? And I can remember being in a relationship and I sat with it instead of reacting. I sat with it, but I was like, oh, what I'm worried about right now is that I'm not enough, that they don't value me enough to put the effort into the relationship. And I was like, that's not what this is. He's an asshole and he's being an asshole. And this has nothing to do with me. His actions are not my responsibility or my fault. And it was so freeing to be at a place where I could pull back and be like, oh.
But then it's finding that balance too, isn't it? Because I have women that come out of relationships and then all of a sudden they're like, he's an asshole. He's got red flags. He's got red flags. And they're like, no, they won't let anybody in up to the It's like finding this definite balance between those two.
I get it.
But I can completely relate as well to that. Like, always too intense, too annoying, too much. Like, called those sort of things by my dad. But definitely, I think, especially like coming back to like sexual abuse, one of the most detrimental things is that you learn unconsciously that you're disgusting. And I think that's one that people don't understand enough. If someone comes to me for a session and they're like, I'm gross, I'm disgusting, and they're feeling that disgust inside themselves, which is obviously shame, it's a really big red flag for me that something sexual has happened, because that disgust, unless someone has been saying to you, you're disgusting, outwardly saying to you, you're disgusting, that disgust feeling, that child can only understand it as that, as gross or disgusting, can often come from sexual trauma. And when I think back, there were so many moments where he was doing something wrong, but I decided that it was about me and that I was doing something wrong and that there was something wrong with me. And so as children, we take other people's actions and we make it mean something about ourselves. And so your dad was obviously outwardly telling you that you were a bad girl and that you were bad and things like that. But then there's also a number of people who no one says anything, but as children, we're completely egocentric. We think everything means something about ourselves. We have a limited narrative. We just go, well, my parents are fighting. It must be my fault. He did that to me. It must be my fault. It must mean something about me. And we start to build those beliefs about who we are based off what someone else has done, instead of being like, hold on a minute, actually, he did that. He's disgusting. He's gross. Not me. He is. And it's like this shift, especially in a child, it's this shift of the blame, the pain, the shame, all of that. It's like, that's your pain. That's your inability to regulate. We can give it all back to the person who deserves to carry it, essentially.
And that is such a powerful feeling. I remember when I was first going through that process, and I carried a lot of shame. And who knows, maybe there's a lot more to it that I still have not faced yet. Who knows? The thing I have learned with this is that every time I think I'm healed, there's a new facet. I'm like, oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
But I remember crystal clear the moment that I realized, oh, you know what? This is not my shame. I was a child. I did nothing that I should have been ashamed of, but I was very ashamed of that experience and that time in my life. And I very much remember the moment that I was like, there's nothing that my kids could do that would validate that kind of treatment. And that for me was very healing to realize that, nope, this is their shame. This is their bad choices. This is their failure as parents. It wasn't that I was a bad child or that my mother used to love to say that I was hard to love. And I realize now, like, my kids can be assholes. They can be so hard sometimes, but I always love them. And it's never a, gee, you were a hard child to love. It's a, gee, I'm a failure as a parent, and therefore I have to put blame on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And their inability to emotionally regulate and projecting their pain. And there is no child that isn't hard at times. I think every single child has, because we're a human being trying to raise another human being who thinks differently. We like to think that our children are a part of us and they will think the same way that we think, that we know what's best for them, but we don't. Like, two boys couldn't be any more different. And the way that I have to parent them, relate to them, the way that I have to deal with conflict, anything that's happening in their life is completely different because they're completely different people with completely different thoughts. But the old method of parenting is, I'm the parent, I know best, you're my child. What's wrong with you if you're not a model child? And I think Dr. Shafali says this best. She's like, everyone wants this model child, but give me a model parent. Give me a model human. Give me a human that is perfect. And she's like, we want our kids to be outgoing, but we don't want them to be too loud. And we want them to be humble, but we don't want them to be too humble or too shy or too quiet. We want them to be proud of their achievements. And we want them to be smart, but we don't want them to be too smart. Or we want them to be like a bit sporty as well. And she's like, we've got all this criteria of this perfect human and no human fits that criteria. And yeah, she's like, we're not used to accepting our children as human beings that are unique.
What I have realized with my children is that rather than an opportunity to create or mold or control, they're a mirror, and they're a mirror to where I need to grow as a person. So when we had conflicts, it's less about, oh, I need to control this or I need to clamp down on this. It's like, okay, why am I having a hard time with this? Because they're just being a kid who's struggling with this because growing up is hard. And why am I, as an aware adult who's here to help them grow through this process, why am I struggling with this? Where is it that I'm needing to really look at myself to be like, all right, you need to breathe deep and ground yourself. My daughter's 15 and my son's 13. They're teenagers now. One of them will have a really emotional outburst or something, and they'll come back later and they'll be like, Mom, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, being a teenager is hard. This process is hard. It's okay. I get it. We will get through it together. And I look back and I think my parents missed so many opportunities for growth and for love because they were so focused on pushing their own pain forward.
So I work mostly with women. Their biggest complaint about their children is they don't listen. They don't listen. It's like the number one thing, right? And I always say to them, like, after I explain how their brains work and how their brains like not even fully developed, but all of that, I always say to them, it's not about the fact that they're not listening. That's a trigger for you. And what's that triggering inside of you? And for every single one of them, there is like an inner child just screaming out that wanted to be listened to by their own parents. And the child wants to be listened to in return, but parents are just barking orders at children all day. And then when they're not listening, they're being triggered. And then they're almost remembering what it was like to be a child, to have these orders barked at them all day and to not be able to say what they want to say, what they want to do with their day, to this like feeling of being small. And so their children are just triggering them all the time back into this smallness. And so many people, when they have that aha moment, all of a sudden when their children don't listen, they're so much more patient. They're like, let's get down and explain to them why they need to put their shoes on. We're going to be late for school. Mom's going to be late for work, whatever. Instead of just screaming at their kids because they're not listening and they're triggered, they're actually able to connect.
It's amazing how learning how to mother my inner child is so healing. And you don't realize how much it helps until you start turning that love back in on yourself and you realize oh God, this love that I have always been so desperate to find from someone else, if I pour it into myself instead of pouring it into people who are not worthy and don't appreciate it and just suck for me, if I instead give it to myself, it heals me and it makes me a much more whole person and a much more grounded person. And I'm not looking for it in the wrong places any longer.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
I read an interesting article a few weeks ago. I'm still trying to figure out the relationship with my mother. We are no contact, and that's not going to change. But I'm trying to figure out how I handle that piece. And it talked about how often mothers that are controlling or are abusive or judgmental come from a place of their inner child being jealous of a cycle breaker. And I was like, that's fascinating that these women who perpetuated the cycle, but then have a daughter like you or me that's strong enough to stand up and say, no, this ends with me. I am the end of this cycle. And then mothers who wish they had had that strength or wish they'd had the ability to do that are then jealous, and it makes further toxicity in the relationship. It's definitely hard work. I didn't intend, well, no, I did intentionally break the cycle. I knew that I did not want to be the parent that my parents were. I didn't know exactly the extent to which it would be, but I did know that that was not my path. But I'm grateful for it because it has healed me so much. Showing up as a better person for them has healed me so much. And as you said, given me a chance to parent that inner child that I don't know that I ever would have even looked into until I had kids.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I always joke. I love what I do and I love how much I've grown. But sometimes I kind of get when people don't want to go into it because it's just like it's just like an unraveling, a constant unraveling. And once you open it, it almost becomes an addiction in a way because it's like you can't think a thought without wondering where that thought's come from. And you can't be triggered without trying to uncover what that trigger is. And it's exhausting. It's called work because it's hard. But then yet people don't want to do that.
Yeah. My kids are teenagers now. And so I'm very open with them because my parents were so worried about secrecy and you can't tell other people this or that or whatever. I've taken the extreme opposite, which is like I've always said to my kids, if you have the courage to ask a question, I have the courage to answer it. I promise you that. Now, don't ask me a question you don't want me to answer. But it's been a cool experience for me to heal myself in being a more conscious and aware parent for them. And I have had moments where I'm like, I can understand why my father would just snap and beat the shit out of me. Because I've had those moments where I'm like, this is too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just got physical, it wouldn't fix anything, but it would take away the pain of this moment. And it would be a quick end. And I know that. I'm bigger, I'm louder, I'm more physically capable. I could physically make this stop.
Yeah.
But the end result would not be the one that I'm working towards. And it's hard because I've got his temper.
Yeah, but you have this is where the work comes in, isn't it? Because you have emotional intelligence, just feel it coming into, and this is where I'm a little bit controversial when it comes to this, but I talk about this with sexual abuse in that a lot of people are like, how could somebody do that? Especially to your own child. How can abusers do that? Like, it's disgusting. Like, they need to learn how to control their urges. But what actually happens is like their brain, like when you've been sexually abused as a child, it causes intrusive thoughts. Your brain's trying to process, it's trying to understand. And so they have these intrusive thoughts when they get older. Now, if they've had a lot of trauma, their brain has developed in a way that they're not going to actually be able to suppress those intrusive thoughts. They're not going to be able to have that intrusive thought and have the logical brain come on. Their logical brain is shut down. Their emotions can be shut off. They can go into a complete dissociative state to the point where they can actually completely forget that they've even done it. They can put it into another personality. If they've got a personality disorder, they can basically split it off, compartmentalize, they can justify it. Like, these people are sick, and they're sick because things have happened to them. Doesn't excuse it, obviously, but people do have a choice as to what they do with those intrusive thoughts when they start to come through. But depending on the level of trauma, some people don't even know that they have a choice, if that makes sense. And so I was thinking when you were talking about that being triggered is like, you have a high level of self-awareness and you're here for a reason to spread a message to bring the cycle to change. But some people don't have that, like they snap and they don't have that awareness of, oh, I'm triggered right now. This is what's happening. That they snap and they're hurting. And before they know it, they're shaming themselves. They're regretting what they've done. They feel awful about it. They have a drink to forget, or they put it to another personality, and they're just continuing this cycle and they don't know why they're doing it. And it's a lot to do with the brain. It's a lot to do with the way that the brain has developed to cope. And I did a post on this about what's happening inside the brain of an abuser. Their emotions and their ability to connect with the human that they're hurting is actually shut off. So they don't actually perceive that person as a human being in that moment. It's only until afterwards. And then they have some coping mechanism to deal with what they've done. But in the moment when it takes over their brain, they're almost a different person. And I recognized that with my father. Like his eyes would look different.
Yes.
There was a darkness in his eyes. Like he was like soulless almost. And I think people don't realize how hard it is actually to take control of your brain and stop that trigger. So that's an amazing thing for you to be able to do that, to stop physical violence, verbal, any type of abuse. It's actually really hard work. It's actually really hard to go, I'm not going to be like that. I think as women with sexual violence and sexual abuse, it's a bit different because I think we have this like mother instinct. So I never had to control my instincts because I just never had those feelings towards my kids. But with men, it's a little bit different. There's something there that's not connecting that that's their child. And maybe it's because we grow them and we have those motherly instincts. But I do see plenty of mums that are physically abusive, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive to their children. And I see it out in public. It's everywhere. Like you see, yeah. And I have this fight between that poor child, someone needs to protect that child, and also that poor mum, like what happened to her and why can't she control it? And I wish she could know how to, that there's a different way.
You're making me think. I'm you're talking about the intrusive thoughts, and I'm like, I wonder if there's more in my backstory that I'm not yet at a place where I realize. Because like the more we talk, the more I'm like, this is really interesting.
I bet there's been a couple of moments where you're like, what? I think
it's really interesting.
I did a training not that long ago. I do trainings regularly on like sexual trauma and things like that. And out of every training, there is a number of people that come forward and say, holy moly, during that, I remembered this. After that training, I remembered this. And just having that education and awareness makes them go, oh. So I think, again, I'm passionate about like, for anyone listening, you shouldn't have nightmares about being raped. You shouldn't be having nightmares about being chased by people who are trying to rape you. You shouldn't have sexual nightmares about inappropriate, like I used to have dreams all the time about having sex with my dad. And that's not normal. That's not normal. That shouldn't be happening. Your brain is trying to show you something. Your dreams are where you're in a theta brainwave. So you're in access to your subconscious. Your brain's it's not giving you nightmares to piss you off. It's giving you nightmares for you to try and be able to heal what your brain is unconscious to, or hasn't got the ability to process. You shouldn't be having sexual intrusive thoughts. And this one's controversial. People say, oh no, intrusive thoughts don't have to mean anything. They don't necessarily relate back to anything, but sexual intrusive thoughts relate to sexual experiences. There shouldn't be large gaps in memories. There shouldn't be, and sexual acts. If there's certain things that if people are dissociating during sex, that's a red flag. If people there's certain positions or certain sexual acts that they just it's just a no-go zone and they just panic and they don't want to do it and they don't know why. Also a really clear sign of sexual abuse. Yeah, gaps in memory, things like that. So like those are all really clear signs to me if someone's coming to me and I'm asking them a series of questions alongside this feeling of disgust and grossness towards themselves and their body. And yeah, like sexual reproductive issues. If you're pairing this with reproductive issues, like I start to ask people just a few questions and, you can get a pretty picture pretty quickly. I have clients who I ask them questions and I kind of like write it on their file. We work on all their other trauma, but I have a note there saying like repressed sexual trauma, like very clear. Every time they're coming back to me without me even saying anything. Sometimes a few months later, once we've processed memories, they get the new memories. Sometimes it's a year. I had one client that was 3 years later and she messaged me. I was the first person she messaged and she said, okay, you know about repressed memories. I've just had the most horrific memory come through and I'm in shock. And I know that you mentioned a while ago that because I said to her something like the things that she was saying and the things that she was feeling in her body, I was like, something's happened and I don't know what it is, but it'll only come through when you're ready. And it was absolutely horrific. But I knew that I had in her file, like capital letters, it's going to be there. There's signs. You can read it in people. You can see it. You can hear it in what they're saying. You can tell from what they're dreaming. You can tell from their mental state, from the way that they present. Like it is so easy for me now to see it and it's very clear. So I think I'm really passionate now about like telling people these things because a number of people go, oh, that is me. I have all those things. And then it links and it's frustrating. It's so frustrating because then they're like, well, how am I going to remember? How do I uncover it? But it's frustrating for them almost to know, but it's also a little bit relieving because it's like, that's why this is happening. So yeah.
It's interesting. And it's, as I said, you've given me a lot to think about because, like, as you've said things, I'm like, oh, well, that's real interesting, and that's real interesting. And I know that there are so many of us that walk around. I call us the walking wounded. There's so many people in society today that are carrying wounds that aren't theirs to carry, but that they carry so much shame and so much pain over. And by being open and honest about your experiences, you're giving so many people visibility in a way that they may have never gotten before. Because so many people that have had these experiences are terrified to own it openly. They're terrified to put it out there in the light of day. And, you know, especially when you've been raised in shame and in guilt, then to turn around and be like, you know what, I'm going to take that shame and guilt. And rather than continue to hide it, which feels the most natural and the most normal, I'm going to stick it out there and I'm going to put it out there for everyone to judge and pick apart and analyze and for trolls to come in and weigh in.
It's hard.
The amount of courage that you embody is amazing.
I think that's, it's definitely not something I had to build up to over time. Like really dip your toe in because, a lot of the things that I say are very direct and very opinionated, but like they're coming from my experience with thousands of women. But it's poking people's buttons and people definitely do come for you. I at least have maybe 5 hate comments a day and probably at least 1 or 2 like actual DMs, like they've escalated it from comments to wanting to like tell me directly. But I think I always have to like, it's definitely not easy, but I always have to like outweigh that. Like, and my partner always says to me, for every 1 hate that you get 20 people saying, holy moly, you've just blown my mind. Holy moly, you've made me realize something. And I think that it's worth it for that. I think it's worth it for those women that have those epiphanies because I wish someone had been speaking about this. I remember when I first had all my memories come back and hit me, I was an absolute wreck. And I remember like being on Google and ChatGPT wasn't around then, but I remember like I was on Google and I was like, books on father-daughter sexual abuse. How do you heal father-daughter sexual abuse? And like, there was nothing. There was absolute crickets. There was no one talking about repressed memory and no one talking about what that is and how it works. And every time I'd Google it, it'd be like, there's like this thing called the memory wars. And it was like, are they even real? And I was just so confused. And I think I was dedicated at that time to then being the person that would help other people to identify that they've got repressed memories, to say to them, they're real. You can trust them. I believe you. And to have all of those things that I didn't have. And people think, like you said, like this where the walking wounded, like people think that it's not them. Yeah. They want to think that it's not them. They want so badly to believe that it's not them because they don't want to deal with it. And that's why they repressed it in the first place. Like repression only happens when what was happening was unfathomable. It was, you are not able to process it. It was too much terror, too much panic, too much pain, too much sadness, whatever it is. It was too overwhelming for you to be able to process it. Now, for people who have trauma that they're consciously aware of, it's like, oh my gosh, if I have repressed memories, what are they? Because if I've got all this conscious trauma that's awful, that had to have been next level awful for me to repress it. Statistically, most repression is sexual trauma. I don't know why specifically sexual, potentially because it's so confusing, the shame surrounding it. But it's something like 84% of sexual trauma is repressed, like worldwide, 84%. So there's so many people walking around with it that aren't even aware that they've got it. And it's just that it's dissociative amnesia is the actual technical term. It's dissociative amnesia. So it's basically a forced forgetting through dissociation, through intense levels of dissociation to be able to fragment the memory. So it's protective. And I always say to people, your brain's going to give it to you when you're ready. It's not going to give it to you a moment before. And when it does give it to you and you feel like you can't handle it, remember that it's only giving it to you because you can handle it. And I've had that as evidence with myself, with my siblings, with my clients as to it comes through when it's ready. It comes through when you're ready to access it.
Wow. This has been amazing. You've given me a lot to think about. You are.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm thinking. And you can come to me for it. I can help you. We'll do a session later and we'll be okay. I promise.
And I mean, but you really are doing amazing work. I don't know if you realize what a beautiful gift you are giving others by using your own pain and trauma as an example. You're showing people how to work through their own and how to heal their own. And that's amazing.
Yeah, I think someone said to me a little while ago, you're not just an advocate. You're not just saying these things like, this means you have sexual trauma, this means you have sexual trauma and sending people into a tizzy. You're saying, this means sexual trauma, but also I've spent 15 years figuring out how to fix it and I have the solution for you and I want you to get better. And you're kind of giving people this whole solution. And yeah, I think my coping mechanism, as I mentioned at the start, was to just keep moving forward. So I still have a lot of trouble with actually recognizing what I'm achieving, what I've done, how far I've come, because I'm just very like tunnel vision forward. And my partner is the opposite. He like celebrates everything. He's like the smallest win, he's home with flowers and we're out for dinner. Like he is very much a celebrator. And so he'll be like, you reached 20,000 followers. What are you doing? You celebrate, and he's like he wants to like celebrate all of those little wins. So he's like started to get me to like slow down and realize what I'm doing. And he's always reminding me, look at your DMs right now. Look how many people are like, I'm so glad I found you. And I'm like, I know, but I need to reach more. And like, there's always this. So my work this year is actually like tapping a little bit out of so much of like the intensity of advocating and speaking and all of that, and kind of moving more into like really just enjoying life while all of these seeds that I've planted can actually start to grow, because I've got all these resources and tools. And yeah, it's definitely like I think once I stop, I might realize how much I've achieved, but it's kind of just that coping mechanism of like moving forward. It just stops you from seeing it.
And I think, I honestly think that sometimes that's a defense mechanism in its own right. Because I'm one where anytime I'm uncertain, I put my focus on moving forward. You're doing incredible things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you for joining us. This has been amazing. And as I said, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm sure you're going to get a message from me at some point, but like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I'm excited to see where you go with this. The gift that you're giving the world is so profoundly important. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Caroline's Adventure podcast. While you're here, Subscribe to the show so you're the first to catch new episodes when they're released. And if you enjoyed hanging out with me today, please leave a 5-star rating. For links to social media and more content, visit the description for this episode or go to carolinesadventure.com. That's Caroline with 2 A's, adventure.com.